You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. This week, we're sort of following up on last week's episode about critical race theory because the vitriol directed against it continues to be intense and harrowing. And totally undeserved. So this week, in addition to my special guest for the conversation, historian and writer Ilyon Woo, our Fighting Words segment is about some compelling, awesome, life-changing books that will forever change your perspective about history and the United States and, well, among other things. But before we get into any of that, we need to go inside the headlines. As regular listeners know, periodically I do different things with various segments of this podcast, sometimes for a good reason, and sometimes just to shake things up. Today, both are in play as my excuses. Because there is a substantive list of nonfiction books with my commentaries at the end of this episode, I'm going to devote Inside the Headlines today to another story. Also true, but way inside the historical headlines, even after decades. It's a poem, a versified novel, a play even, written by a poet. Not only a poet, but shockingly enough, a poet from the American South. And worse, a white poet. And worse yet, a man. At this point, you can always just skip ahead to the conversation or even to the list itself, which has been offered by distinguished historians, all women of color, mostly African American. But you'd be missing something. You'd be missing the story that lay coiled inside the headlines until rescued by this very white male Southerner poet, whose name was Robert Penn Warren. He was born in Kentucky, and he died in 1989. He was a first-rate American poet. While still an undergraduate at Vanderbilt University, he became associated with a group of poets known as the Fugitives. And later, during the 1930s, he and some of the same writers formed a group known as the Southern Agrarians, which included such poets as John Crow Ransom, Allen Tate, and Donald Davidson. No, women were appallingly uninvited. And for a while, some of his poetry, at least in sync with the rest of the group, actually he defended segregation in some poems. But he soon grew out of that and began writing about the divided South searching for its soul in an essay that appeared in Life magazine. He became a strong supporter of racial integration and established clear, sometimes lifelong, differences with his fellow agrarians like Tate, Cleanth Brooks, and Davidson. These differences existed in part for his having dared publish a collection of interviews with black civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr. and even Malcolm X. Robert Penn Warren went on to win many prizes in his distinguished career, including a National Book Award, 2 Pulitzers in poetry, and a third for his famous novel, All the King's Men in 1947, about Huey Long, the radical populist governor of Louisiana who became quite a, well, fascist is one word for it. That, in turn, was made into a movie and an opera. Penn Warren served as a consultant in poetry to the Library of Congress and later as poet laureate. His honors just go on, but to me, one pinnacle of his career is the book, Brother to Dragons, which is a biblical quote, a tale in verse and voices. Published in 1953, Brother to Dragons is a book-length poem unlike any in American literature. The subject was a shocking, real-life murder perpetrated by Lilburn Lewis, a nephew of Thomas Jefferson, watched by his brother Isham Lewis, and told in blank verse as a poem, book, play. It has frequently been performed, always as a unique literary mode. The characters, all dead, except for one, the poet himself, designated as Robert Penn Warren, RPW, try to understand a monstrous event. The story is based on the real-life 1811 crime in which the Lewis brothers, drunk, hacked an enslaved black teenage boy to death. A news story Penn Warren located in original documents found in the Southland, Kentucky courthouse. The murder occurred in a meat house when Lilburn Lewis brutally butchered an enslaved 17-year-old boy named George to death with an axe for the sin of breaking a pitcher of which Lilburn's mother, Lucy Jefferson Lewis, had been fond. 7 other enslaved people also watched this agony and violence. Lilburn then burned the dismembered pieces of George's body. At about 2 a.m., though, an earthquake hit western Kentucky, causing the chimney to collapse and smother the fire. The next day, during the aftershocks, the Lewis brothers forced their enslaved people to clean the remains of the body from the fireplace and begin rebuilding it, concealing the unburnt portions of the body among the rocks of the reconstructed chimney. But in 1812, a year later, a neighborhood dog retrieved George's skull and deposited it in open view in the roadway, and inquiries began. The Lewis brothers were investigated, arrested, and charged. After they were released on bail, in 1812, Lilburn encouraged his brother to carry out a joint suicide pact after their release, but only Lilburn died. Isham escaped from jail, disappeared, and later on was one of 7 men killed on the American side at the Battle of New Orleans. Numerous books and articles have examined the Lewis brothers' mental instability and their alcoholism. In Penn Warren's poem, beside Lilburn, present, there is Isham Lewis, who watched his brother commit the murder, their mother, Lucy, Jefferson's sister, her brother, Thomas himself, Letitia, Lilburn's wife, Aunt Cat, Lilburn's nurse and, quote, mammy, close quote, Meriwether Lewis, Lilburn's cousin, who went west on the Lewis and Clark expedition, and RPW. The poem is of note not only for its focus on the hideous event, but also because of its being entangled with the Lewis and Clark expedition, of which Jefferson was so proud, also known as the Corps of Discovery expedition, to cross the newly acquired western portion of the country after the Louisiana Purchase. Yet another demonstration of how inextricably the institution of enslavement is embedded in the history of this nation. But especially the poem gives voice to the character of Jefferson, though there's no evidence that the historical Jefferson ever discussed or even acknowledged the murder, which suggested to Penn Warren that Jefferson simply couldn't face the thought of such barbarity in someone of his own blood. Whatever the reason, Jefferson's voice in the poem is fairly grim and cynical, recognizing that he had been overly optimistic in his 18th century Enlightenment view of human nature. But the moral project of the poem is not to convince Jefferson of the reality of evil, which he affirms from the first, but to convince Jefferson that he himself shares that burden of evil. Because, at least outside of scholarly circles and those of poets, the facts of this atrocity and the subject of this poem aren't all that widely known, and if known, have been perhaps forgotten. Because of this, I cite it here. But I cite it here for another reason. It's a stunningly powerful piece of art, one that profoundly addresses the multi-layered conflicts that even the most proudly principled white people find themselves struggling with today. Penn Warren revised it more than once during his lifetime, so you might as well read the new version. I offer you, then, Brothers to Dragons, a tale in verse and voices, as the work of a major American poet, applying all of his intelligence, emotional as well as intellectual, to a subject that many, even today, are afraid to broach. It's not at all dated, and it's quite a worthy read. We need to take our first break here, but I'll return directly with Ilyon Woo, so don't go away. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My guest for today's conversation is Ilyon Woo. Her writing has appeared in the Boston Globe and the Wall Street Journal. She has received support for her research from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the American Antiquarian Society, and she holds a BA in the Humanities from Yale and a doctorate in English from Columbia. Today, she's here to talk with us about her new book, Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, the extraordinary true story of Ellen and William Craft, who escaped slavery with determination and in disguise, with Ellen defying both sex and race rules in passing as a wealthy, disabled white man, and William posing as his slave. Here is Ilyon Woo. Ilyon Woo. Ilyon, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, you have produced a remarkable book, Master, Slave, Husband, Wife. And wow, and the research that must have gone into this book is brain-boggling, I might add. But it is the remarkable little true story of Ellen Craft and William Craft, who escaped enslavement through incredible courage and disguise. And the disguise was Ellen's passing as a rich, disabled, white man, and William posing as, quote, his slave. Talk about how you came to write this book first, and then we'll talk about what their story really is.
Well, I was very lucky to have been assigned their wonderful, moving 1860 narrative, Running 1,000 Miles to Freedom. So this is a story that they tell in their own words, 12 years after they've made this heroic escape. So I think they tell this late in part because they wanted to tell it themselves. They didn't want to have a literary collaborator who could change their words. They wanted to have acquired the literacy and the time to be able to express themselves in their own words. Words are something that are so powerful from so early on in their lives, when words have been written down to tear them apart from their family members, leading to their mortgage and their sale and all kinds of devastation. So it's an incredible moment when they turn the tables and they seize their opportunity and their pen and they use their voice. And what a voice it is.
So
This
moving.
is a story.
It's very moving.
It is.
Their thirst,
It is.
their hunger for literacy, and then they're glimpsing that they're going to get it. Go on.
Yes. The thing is that this voice is, it's told in the first person. And if you look at the cover of their book, their published book, it says by William Craft. But now scholars commonly, myself included, credit both William and Ellen Craft with the writing of the story because there are simply so many scenes that he was not privy to that clearly come from her point of view.
Yeah. Well, let me interject this at this point, and I might as well fess up. They are both riveting characters, no question. It reads almost like a novel, although it's real life. Excuse me. But of the two of them, and granted that he's an incredibly courageous man, and a fascinating character, but of the two of them, Ellen Craft is amazing. She is such a strong woman, such a brilliant woman, such a clever, resourceful, spontaneous, excuses made up on the spot when they're fleeing woman. And then when they make it finally to the north, she begins to hang out with suffragists because they're in Boston, and it's that great period of ferment around the time of Seneca Falls and the suffrage. Yeah. So she's running with feminists and suffragists all over the place, and she is feeling her oats. So I think you're quite right. I think it's quite clear that she did, at least up to a certain point, when we don't know why, either because there was pressure from him. He wasn't always the perfect husband, or whether there was just pressure from society, or whether she decided she'd had enough. But she kind of retires from the public eye. But up until that point, she's the one that the crowds flock to see, isn't she?
And actually, I would argue that she doesn't so much retire from the public eye as she shifts her position.
Yes.
So, what's so heroic? The Crafts are just heroes through and through. Yeah. But what is pretty amazing and unique about their story is, the story doesn't just end with their arriving in the North and, their freedom is won and happily ever after or anything like that. Not that any of these stories were happily ever after, but what they tell is a story that extends far beyond. And what we can track is a story that extends far beyond. And one of the first chapters to come after the initial incredible escape is that they decide they are invited by another man named William Wells Brown, who's also a self-emancipated man, star lecturer, really kind of like dazzling person, best-selling author. And he, recognizing the brilliance of their story and also the effect that it will have as really a piece of anti-slavery propaganda, he invites them to join them on the road. And of course, Ellen is a major draw.
That's right.
But she has to walk this very fine line, because if she had to prove herself as a man on the escape journey, now she really has to prove herself as a woman.
Right.
Because there was such the stigma against women appearing and speaking in public, despite the Lucy Stones and the Abby Kelly Forsters who are speaking, right?
That was considered a greater shock, even than her having passed for white, or her turning out to be black, or anything else, that she had dressed in men's clothes and she had been in all male salons with men, and she had been, oh my God, everyone was shocked and appalled, my dear. They clutched their pearls.
Yeah, and I don't know if I could actually compare which is the most shocking, because all of these kinds of disguises were, she was crossing bounds of race, gender, class,
right,
and ability. All four lines by which people still continue to find themselves in society today.
Exactly.
And so, but one of the big ones was gender. You could say So actually, when she goes to England, and there's a big irony here because, Victoria is the queen, and yet there's an even greater stigma there of women speaking out in public. So she's on the stage. People want to know her story. There's this actually, William Wells Brown, both for safety reasons, I think, because you don't know who's in the audience, and sort of for theatrical reasons, he kind of keeps the craft hidden at the beginning of these presentations. And then there's this moment when they are unveiled and people see Ellen Craft, and there's this gasp. So there's automatically this just kind of like spectacle of Ellen Craft, and that's exactly what a lady is not supposed to do, is make a big spectacle of herself, let alone put on male clothing. I mean, this was years before the whole bloomer movement. I mean, it's absolutely shocking. And William Wells Brown, of course, will tell stories like, there's this one in a crazy episode when they're on a train and they've gotten into the special car because Ellen, as a privileged male invalid, needs some extra space. And there are these young ladies who are so enchanted by him, that they're like trying to put their shawls on him and say, will you please lie down, sir? And their father, who is also like, oh, this is a nice wealthy guy, and my daughter's going to like, and he's like pulling off her boots, and so her ankles are exposed. This is like absolutely shocking. So for her to have all this story behind her and the public interested in the story is one thing, but then to be on a stage and to be in the spotlight as a woman is another.
That's
and
right.
So she has to walk a really fine line between satisfying the public curiosity, rousing anti-slavery fervor, and yet being respectable enough that people will believe her and not want to shun her. It's just like,
the tightrope.
Tightrope she continues to walk.
Yeah, it is extraordinary, the story you've told. It really is. And we now realize, because there were beginning to be cases that surfaced even then, that there were other cases of enslaved people who had escaped in disguise, although nothing as dramatic that I know of, nothing at all as dramatic as the Crafts. I mean, and they dodged slave traders and military officers and even friends of the enslavers, and and they sustained the relationship, making their escape across more than 1,000 miles. They rode on steamboats, they rode on carriages, they rode on trains, and they went all the way from their little slave cabin in Macon, Georgia, to the free states of the North, and eventually to England. And she, more than William, from Ellen, we get it. We get loud and clear what she would do in certain situations when she had to act spontaneously and creatively in disguise. And that's remarkable.
And the way they work together as a team, and they sort of manipulate all these roles and sort of bring in audience participation to work in their favor, I find is to be really just absolutely brilliant. And later on, of course, they have to, William as well as Ellen have to be careful of these gender roles. And William also has to sort of like protect his wife, or seem to be protecting his wife as he's on that stage. And it's in both of their interests for him to really be like the leader and the one. I mean, so part of Ellen retiring, appearing like not like she wants to do this, but because she had to do it, requires that it's William's idea. So all of this actually evolves.
That's
in the very beginning, they're telling the story in a different way. William Wells Brown is helping to tell their story. They're improvising their story. It's not clear whose idea it was. And in fact, what my research points to, building on Barbara McCaskill's research also, is that really all signs point to Ellen.
Yeah.
And it's only later, it's much later, that they start to kind of retool the story, and William plays an increasingly dominant role. But in fact, it was very much a partnership.
Right. And please, let's remember two rather salient facts. First, that they were never for 1 second out of danger, even when they were, quote, free, unquote. because this was the age of the Fugitive Slave Act as of 1850.
Yeah.
When anywhere
Yeah.
in the country, a slaveholder could appear suddenly and say, whether it was true or not, whether they meant it or not, whether anything, they could say, "That's my slave, by the way, and you have to return him to me," and the law would back that up. So this is terrifying. I mean, it's just terrifying to live with. So that, on the one hand, is what they lived with, and almost died with many times. And on the other hand, there was, even in William Wells Brown and in Frederick Douglass and in many of the speakers of that day, you have to remember that this, as you well know, of course, this was entertainment. I mean, there was no television, there were no movies, the lectures were like a play, but without the shocking immorality of the theater. So they were serious. They were lectures, and so then they were on meaningful subjects, so people could go and not feel guilty, I suppose. Anyway, but William Brown was quite a showman, wasn't he? He was like not a P.T. Barnum, but almost, in a way. He was a promoter.
He was really like I would call him like a performance artist, because he would perform with these vast panoramas. He would incorporate music and song. He would, have a call and respond to the audience. He would take, newspapers and all kinds of things and quote them and, have shackles and display them. I mean, he used
drama.
Everything. It was like a three-dimensional storytelling experience, yes. But others, as you say, were doing this too. Like Daniel Webster was giving lectures on constitutional history, and Emerson was lecturing at this time.
And
if you have a big book, if you have a big voice,
and largely because of your book, I understood the context in which the suffragists began to lecture. I mean, they lectured a lot, of course, but that context.
Oh yeah, this is a key time.
That's right.
Yeah, this is because this is so the escape is in 1848, the year of Seneca Falls, but then in 1850, that's where you have the first gathering of a National Women's Rights Conference in Worcester, and you have Douglass and Garrison also joining all these women. You have Lucy Stone and Abby Kelly Foster, all these people speaking, both on behalf of enslaved people and also for women.
It's a fabulous
enslaved
story.
And not.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's and of course, the suffragists were in the front lines of abolition of slavery, and so this is all one enormous mixed thing.
I wish I could have dwelled longer with Abby Kelly Foster. And in fact, I had many, many more pages on her because I just found her so fascinating. Her relationship with her husband, Stephen, and, sort of the all the judgment she came up against for trying to wean her daughter early and switching those roles, where Stephen is the one who's doing more of the caretaking at home. All the while they have, they're operating an underground railroad station, and then she's speaking. And also everybody knows, like down to Stephen, that she's the better speaker. She's the one who everybody's going to see.
Right.
And yet there's all this judgment. And when they, Stephen and Abby, right around this time in February, 175 years ago, they are joining the Crafts on the stage. So they're this kind of power quartet of double couples around Valentine's Day, and they are telling their stories together. Can you imagine? I mean, it just must have been spectacular. Unfortunately, we don't have detailed reports of what that looked like, but I love to imagine it.
Yeah, wouldn't it have been amazing if we had audio or video, any visual kind of things to tell us what happened? But your writing, I have to tell you, my dear, comes a close second. And this follows on another book of yours, which sounds very interesting to me. To say just a few words about it. The Great Divorce, a 19th century mother's extraordinary fight against her husband, the Shakers, and her times. Aha. So that's a feminist book. Oh, my God.
It absolutely is. I mean, and there's so many levels of irony there too in that story. I mean, for me, I first discovered that story through the Shakers, who I love. I mean, the Shakers were founded by powerful English woman, a woman from Manchester, visionary, charismatic, who was absolutely disempowered as a mother, as a wife in the 18th century. And then she went on to become the mother of the Shakers, of like the longest running utopian society in American history.
Wow.
And then during the early 1800s, around Eunice Chapman's time, there was a second mother who was arguably even more powerful. She wasn't the same kind of like, flash and fire, charismatic that Anne Lee was, but she was an excellent administrator. She made a great president of the society, and she's really the one who built it up. So you have this incredible society that empowers women, that gives women equal leadership opportunities to men, if not higher in these particular examples. You have this, in many ways, a feminist society brought down in this situation because they're a celibate society. When you join the sect, you have to give up your property, the communitarian and celibate. You give up your earthly bonds, whether that's to physical possessions and things or to other people, and you really kind of give your heart openly to God and to worship and to each other. And so when this ne'er-do-well, James Chapman, finds God among the Shakers and he says, I want to be a better man and I want to join you, they say, you have a wife, you have 3 children, you've abandoned them. That's not right. And we cannot accept you until you provide for them.
Wow.
His way of providing for them is to bring them into the sect, which is absolutely within his rights to do as a man, as a husband. But Eunice doesn't want to have anything to do with the society. In fact, I think she could have made a great Shaker leader if things had gone a different way. But instead, you have this terrible situation that pits mother against mother, mother of the Shakers against mother Eunice Chapman.
Oh, what a fascinating!
Fighting for her 3 children.
I have to read this book now. We have to have you back on to discuss it. In winding up, tell me one thing, because I imagine I'm going to be asked it, but this is interesting. Your name is part Korean, I believe. Tell me if I'm wrong. Ilyon Woo.
It is. It's all Korean.
Yep. It's all Korean. I was going to say and part Chinese, but okay. That was a good guess. But so what drew you in particular to this story about African Americans? Was it the general bond of a woman writer who is a woman of color, or was it something else? This is a deeply sympathetic, deeply empathetic story about enslaved black people who are escaping the institution of slavery. Talk just a little bit about that before we go.
Well, thank you. I mean, maybe my name says some of it. My first name is a pen name of a Korean monk who wrote the first histories of Korea. So you could say that history was with me from my very naming. My own family goes back, I think we can trace it back like 34 generations on my dad's side.
Wow.
And it actually does go back to China. So you're very right. There's both China and Korea in my own personal lineage. But I think really what drew me, I was interested deeply in the subject of slavery and American slavery. I was interested in the crafts and their love story. I was interested, I think, also because of the education that I received very early on and my introduction to history, both within my family and within my schools. I went to a school named after the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's the King Open School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And really, I was encouraged to see history in 3 dimensions and lots of different colors, immigrant stories, Black Americans' histories, Jewish stories. All these things brought together in this big American picture. And I think really what I've tried to do in the book is to create another kind of American picture, one that's not, siloed and divided, as I think we so often have a tendency to do, right. But one in which many different people and many different stories coexist. And if Eleanor William Craft aren't American heroes, I don't know who are.
You are very, very correct. And this is a beautiful story. and you're a terrific writer. So run, do not walk, and pick up a copy of Master, Slave, Husband, Wife. This is the remarkable story, love story, and true story of Ellen Craft and William Craft, who managed to escape enslavement through daring and disguise, with Ellen pretending to be a wealthy, disabled white male when she was actually a black woman, and with William posing as a slave, and they made it out, and they triumphed in that respect, and they had kids, and they went on to lead real lives. So even their after lives are of great interest in this book. Thank you, Ilyon, for writing it and for the work that you're doing. What are you going to work on next? What do you think is next in the queue?
Well, I've got different ideas sort of percolating, but honestly, right now my attention is still so focused on this baby that I'm not yet ready to think about having another one.
Okay, I think I can understand that. Yeah, this book is still teething, so you can, so we shouldn't rush it. But I hope that there will be others. You're a young writer and a good writer, and I'm trusting that there will be many more. And I wish you all possible good luck, and I hope we see you back here someday soon. Thanks again for being with us on Women's Media Center Live.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure, and I'd love to come back.
It's time for our last break here, but I'll return in just a moment with a list of fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Transformative writing. Those are fighting words. Because I believe deeply in the power of good writing, I'm ready to offer the second part of last week's list on books to read by, in fact, Black historian women, feminists, who have given us great gifts of history and compelling reading that will, in fact, change our lives. So if you're ready to have your life transformed in a wonderful way, if you're ready for knowledge that is power, listen on. This is the continuation of my personal list. Medical Apartheid: The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present, by Harriet A. Washington, a fellow, in ethics at Harvard Medical School and at the Harvard School of Public Health. Prodigious research went into this National Book Critics Circle Award for nonfiction, and every award is worth it. Celia, a Slave, by Melton A. McLaurin, the story of a woman who dared to fight back against a rapist master in the 1850s in Missouri and was tried for killing him. Fatal Self-Deception: Slaveholding Paternalism in the Old South. Elizabeth Fox Genovese and Eugene D. Genovese co-authored this work of historical scholarship on just why and how slaveholders had trouble getting their stories straight, since those stories were contradictory, hypocritical, and ideologically empty. The Second Coming of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan of the 1920s, and the American Political Tradition, by Linda Gordon. No, it didn't just happen once. Yes, it has come in waves again and again, and yes, it continues today. An eye-opener of a book. White Rage by Carol Anderson, who is the Charles Howard Candler Professor and Chair of African American Studies at Emory University. And she gives us this National Book Critics Circle Award winner. It delineates how, ever since 1865 and the passage of the 13th Amendment, every single time the African Americans community has made advances toward full participation in our democracy, every time white reactive backlash has fueled deliberate, relentless rollbacks of any gains, from the Black Codes to hostility to President Obama. This brings it all back home and up to date. And, of course, the 1619 Project, devised and coordinated by Pulitzer Prize-winning Nicole Hannah-Jones and the New York Times. It is now a book, a documentary series, a curriculum, and, fortunately, other iterations of consciousness, all of which have been mercilessly attacked by the right wing and by book haters and science deniers. It's a vital source, multiple voices contributing, and it's a source that cannot be ignored and simply should be celebrated as indeed it has been. And you can find it in its various forms easily online. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And we will be on hiatus next week, but we'll be back the week after. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at @TheRobinMorgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.